It is my deep conviction that the development of the world is due to the contribution of all people. It is fraternal help that will allow Africa to free itself entirely from coercion and exploitation and take to the air. History has taught us that African people's residence in the world was long-lived and their accomplishments illustrious. From the roots of the oldest human beings on the planet to the pinnacle of human excellence, harmony, and balance, the origin of human civilization is African. The cycle that is planting roots in an area to growth and ascension all happened within Africa before spreading to the world. I visited the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston for some field research as it houses one of the biggest collections of African art. This art provides insight on these African societies we hear about so much in an almost mythical and abstract sense. But when seen in person, you understand how tangible these actually are, as they give insight on the type of federal, societal, cultural structures that were in place, as well as a plethora of other things. The descriptions in the museum were often very broad and pretty empty of tangible details relating to us in modern-day Africa. So I took it upon myself to tell you my story. What do you say I take you on a short epic full of adventure into the truth of who you truly are?
When it comes to classical civilization, nothing comes close to Nile Valley civilization. It's lasted longer than the Greeks and Roman civilizations put together, and it is quintessentially African. Egypt, Nubia, or Sudan, and Ethiopia were constituting the Nile Valley civilizations. Welcome to Amazinglyafrica. Let's talk antiquity. Did you know that Africans have the longest history and the longest standing civilization in the world? They invented mathematics, writing, agriculture, astronomy, and circumnavigating the world. Africans were the first to circumnavigate the world and settled in different parts of the world before inventors and navigators like Ferdinand Magellan or Christopher Columbus were even born.
Africa has gone by many different names over the centuries. It was once called Ethiopia, Alkebuland, Garden of Eden, and so on and so on. The grand civilizations and empires that existed over the centuries rose and fell like the ebb and flow of ocean waves. From South Africa to North Africa, East Africa to West and Central Africa. The climate over the centuries was ripe with harmony within creativity, which supported the gradual increase in knowledge through application. From the earliest forms of calculating with the bone of Ishango to the golden ratio that is found in living creatures and art and architectural masterpieces. The evidence is there, But the problem is that we've been so programmed to be anti-African that despite our knowledge on these matters, there's still a tendency to want to reject Africa anyways. Why is that? If growing up you remember watching movies such as Tarzan or King Kong, unconsciously when you think about Africa, you think of a half-naked person with an afro running around with a bone in their nose looking for a Christian missionary for dinner or something. Or today, because of certain NGOs and commercials, when you think about Africa, you think of poverty and famine and disease. But that couldn't be any further from the truth. Movies like these have contributed to the negative mental depictions that we still have of Africa today. Because despite all the things that you learn to counter that, those images are still deeply buried in your psyche. So as we explore Africa the way you have never seen it before, I urge you to keep an open mind and liberate yourself. A particular quote that I admire and love from Sheikh Anta Diop is this: "The history of Black Africa will remain suspended in air and cannot be written correctly until African historians dare to connect it with the history of Egypt." Let us note the astonishment of a scholar of good faith, Count Constantin de Volnay, 1757 to 1820. After being imbued with all the prejudice we have just mentioned with regard to the Negro, Volney had gone to Egypt between 1783 and 1785, while Negro slavery flourished. He reported as follows on the Egyptian race, the very race that produced the pharaohs, the Copts. "When I visited the Sphinx, its appearance gave me the key to the riddle. On seeing that head, typically Negro in all its features, I remembered the remarkable passage from Herodotus, saying, 'As for me, I judge the Colchians to be a colony of the Egyptians because like them, they are black with woolly hair.' Furthermore," he says, "we can even state as a general principle that the face is like a monument, able in many cases to attest or shed light on historical evidence on the origins of people." After illustrating this proposition by citing the case of Normans who still resembled the Danes 900 years after the conquest of Normandy, Volney adds, "But returning to Egypt, the lessons she teaches, history contains many reflections for philosophy. Just think that this race of black men, today our slave and the object of our scorn, is the very race to which we owe our arts, sciences, and even the use of speech. Just imagine, finally, that it is in the midst of peoples who call themselves the greatest friends of liberty and humanity that one has approved the most barbarous slavery and questioned whether black men have the same kind of intelligence as whites." End of quote. When it comes to classical civilizations, nothing comes close to that of the Nile Valley civilizations, Egypt, Nubia, and Ethiopia, which lasted longer than the Greek and Roman civilizations put together. And it is quintessentially Black African.
The ancient Egyptians themselves said that they came from the south of Kemet, ancient Egypt, which is further up, higher up the Nile Valley, closer to the source. And they identified the mountains of the moon, which are in modern-day Uganda, as their place of origin.
Most historians now accept, even the European Eurocentric ones, that it is the movement of the peoples from the south to the north that gave birth to Kemet. However, what they fail to recognize that is not just the movement of these one set of Africans traveling from the south to the north, but also movements of other Africans coming from the west to the east. They met and collected together in what is now Kemet. That's why that civilization was so powerful, because it was a multicultural expression of the African experience. It was several sets of different Africans coming together in one place and creating a civilization.
All of these people are connected to each other, and dividing them in a way that implies a level of discreteness that the term race implies is inappropriate. Were there people with darker skin, lighter skin, curlier hair, less curly hair? Yes, there were. There is no evidence that the ancient Egyptians, who did medicine, who made observations, and sometimes detailed artwork about the environment around them, animals, plants, there's no evidence that they had a theory of human variation that would be commensurate or similar to notions of race as they were developed in Europe. There's a deep shared ancestry in the Sahara of these societies. The fact that they were sometimes in conflict, we should not impose our reasons, our ways of thinking onto why this conflict may have occurred. The conflicts were political, social, probably over the same issues. Let's not read ideas about the reason of this conflict back into the past. We have to avoid stereotypes. We have to avoid the old ways of thinking, but just put into new data sets or new types of data, which I do believe that we can see in literature sometimes today, and I think that a lot of times if you look very carefully at the scientific literature, you'll see that sometimes the old ways of thinking are lurking beneath the surface there, and this is something that needs to be addressed.
Most people think of ancient Nubia as a poor imitation and perpetual vassal of pharaonic Egypt. But archaeological discoveries in recent decades have proved them wrong, incrementally revealing magnificent kingdoms. The show at the MFA in Boston, titled Ancient Nubia Now, aimed to redress the balance a little bit further. As it should, since the MFA to some degree helped create that initial impression based on its foundational series of digs with Harvard University between 1913 and 1932, led by George Andrew Reisner of Harvard. To this day, those finds constitute the greatest collection of Nubian artifacts outside of Sudan, the African nation whose Upper Nile region incorporates Nubia of old. 25,000 pieces in their vaults. Unfortunately, what it doesn't attempt to do is tell ancient Nubia's full story from its earliest beginnings, which predates ancient Egypt or Kemet and goes back circa 5,000 years and beyond, as demonstrated by early rock paintings. Nor does it address that Nubia ushered Africa's first Iron Age. You see, in some aspects, the Africa I live in today in the 21st century is different from the one depicted in these bronze and copper, gold, ivory, and ebony and granite statues, monuments, and artifacts. But it's also the same in many ways. You see, Africa, like every other society in the world, was involved in this evolutionary process. Family, tribe, nation, and continent. This evolutionary process leads to unity. And the African evolutionary process was intercepted in two forms by Europeans. The first was slavery, and the second, colonialism. Over 300 million of the strongest outside of Africa. And then they divided Africa during the Berlin Conference. Our current political borders were drawn up and our land was stolen from under us with disregard for groups of peoples, cultures, and without our consent. Today, it's ironic that almost all African countries are described as young because of their recent independence in the 1950s, while simultaneously holding the position of having the longest history of a people on the planet. As you know, because of racism, Africa is belittled everywhere, and because of that, we do not see its constant contribution to world civilizations. ancient Africans had developed several tools and resources that we use every day, like papyrus, which was the first form of paper. They had also developed several writing systems over the centuries in different parts of Africa, such as the hieroglyphics, which is actually called Meduniter, Ethiopic script, Coptic, which later became Greek, and Nsibidi. Nsibidi is said to be one of the oldest writing systems in Africa, and it originates in modern-day Cameroon and Nigeria. The characters and symbols were a reflection of societal, legal, intimate, and spiritual matters. Just as seen in many African cultures, the symbols were immersed in buildings, homes, artifacts, and specific textiles. Not unlike ancient Kemet or Egypt, only the members, in this case only members of the leopard society of the Ijangam people, were privy to meanings behind those CBD symbols, as they hold spiritual significance. Gaining access to this knowledge was the equivalent of winning a Nobel Peace Prize in our modern-day society, so it was a privilege. This African math and science writing led to medicine, geometry, architecture, art, astrology, navigation, irrigation, agriculture. Many of our ancestors sought to keep this knowledge alive through the millennia by literally weaving the information into their clothes. Many fabrics we see worn today in the form of Belgian wax and others from China have nothing to do with what we are dealing with here.
This beautiful deep blue color is made from global indigo leaves and is found in Nigeria as well as Cameroon. It's called Dog in Cameroon in the Bamileke regions.
The process of weaving together textiles took many forms, using raffia trees, Egyptian papyrus, and even native cotton. The textiles were then painstakingly drawn on the fabrics by masters and later dyed in various shades of indigo and brown. And this process incorporated the collaboration of various communities from north, south, east, west of different nations and through dynasties. The Ukura cloth in Nigeria, for example, is very similar to the Ndop and Togo cloth in Cameroon. This goes to show that the current political constraints and borders we have today do not dictate who we are. They say that imitation is the highest form of flattery. Africa continues to inspire but also be imitated today. These writing symbols can be seen in modern-day pop culture, from the Adinkra symbols used on the Target logo to the fashion label designers such as Versace, Louis Vuitton, and so on. It is also said that many of the works of many Europeans, such as Picasso, were highly influenced by African art and the Cubism movement. It's very flattering to be imitated, of being seen as an example to follow. But do not hold your breath in expectation of gratitude, because as this art was being copied, its people were being looted, put in shackles, and decades of propaganda were proliferated in order to prove the inferiority of Africans. A young man named Basquiat turned the tables by reappropriating and remastering what was his birthright. In many of his paintings, we find Sibidi pictograms, and many other Africans are using various African writing systems and adapting them to their current and future prerogatives, like fashion, art, calligraphy, graphic design, and film. You're probably asking yourself, why Africa? Why Amazingly Africa? Why Black Africa? Why? And my answer is simple. My focus will always be what and how I know how to be, and that is African. The African evolutionary process was interrupted by European capitalists. Had Africa been left untrapped, we would have already seen continental unity. African problems will be defended and tackled by Africans and Afro-descendants without compromise. And if I am called fanatical or racist for looking at African solutions to African problems, that is not my vocabulary, as I will never compromise my integrity or apologize for being African, because Africa is who I am, who I was, and who I will always be. I am proud of my heritage, and I want others to see Africa for what it truly is, for its beauty, for its wonderful contributions to the world, for its love, and for all of the things that it has been denied over the centuries. So I urge you to use African history to create your reality instead of looking to others. Like I always say, know thyself to empower thyself. My name is Linda Fwading, and you're listening to Umoja Sessions.